Good evening, folks, and welcome back to Wilderness Wargaming. Tonight we're going to take a look at the datasheet for the newly released Primarch, Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels, who's been sitting around in the rock for the last 10,000 years waiting to come out and show us what he can do. So stick around and we're going to talk about this newly released character and his model just a little bit. So looking at his datasheet, Lionel Johnson is a Lord of War. He is worth 320 points, which is not shown here, but that's what he's worth. Single model. He's 16 power if you're using power levels. And he's, let's see, movement 8 inches, weapon skill 2, ballistic skill 2, strength 6, toughness 6, wounds 9, attacks 10, leadership value of 11, armor save 2 up, and he is armed with fealty, which is his sword, and arma luminous, which is his pistol. And of course, you can only have one of them. Pistol has 2 profiles. It's like a combi pistol. It has bolt profile, 2 shots, strength 4, AP minus 1, damage 2, plasma, 1 shot, strength 8, AP minus 4, damage 2. Now, unlike most combi weapons, you don't take any penalty for shooting with both profiles. They're both 12 inches, so you can pretty much always shoot with both. And the pistol is basically always an overcharged plasma pistol with an extra point of AP, so that's pretty good for a pistol. His sword is pretty awesome. He's got the strike and the sweep profile. Both melee. This strike gives you plus 4 to strength, so that means hitting at strength 10, AP minus 5, 4 damage. Sweep gives him double attacks, and it's going to be at strength 6, AP minus 3, damage 2. Now, it's important to note that he gets shock assault. So his attacks of 10 means upon the charge he's going up to 11 attacks on the strike profile, or 22 attacks on the sweep profile. Now, if we go down to his abilities, he has the Angel's Death, typical Space Marine stuff, Forest Walk. During deployment, he can set up the model basically off the table. This is similar to, this is basically a deep strike, except that it also includes reroll charges for him. Now, that means obviously that he's only going to have about a 50-50 shot of making a charge with the reroll. Still obviously better than having to make a 9-inch charge blank, although you can have the chaplain chant the +2 to charge prayer, and then if he's successful, bring the lion in within his aura on the movement phase, and then have 7-inch charge, essentially, with rerolls, which is much better probability of success. Although that's a little bit fiddly. You cannot put him, unfortunately, to transport because he is a monster, but he does have a movement of 8 inches. So that gives him a little bit of extra speed closer to the enemy. Now he has a shield called the Emperor's Shield. This is a 4-up invuln, and every time he makes a save, if he rolls at 6, notice that this is either with the invulnerable or with the armor, because every time a saving throw is made for the model, it doesn't say an invulnerable save. The attacking model suffers 1 mortal wound after all the models in it have finished their attacks, up to 3 mortal wounds per phase. Okay, so he can dish out up to 3 mortal wounds per melee phase. Now remember, that applies on both your turn and the opponent's turn. Marshal example, at the start of the fight phase, that's fight first. He gives Dark Angels core and character units hit and wound rerolls on 1s, and he has 2 little watchers in the dark that follow him around that allow him to conduct a deny the witch once each per battle, so 2 denies per battle. If he's the warlord, which is pretty much always going to be the case, unless I guess somehow he's in the same army with Guilliman, or maybe if you put him in there in some kind of narrative army with Morven Val or maybe Trajan Valoris, he's going to be the warlord anyhow. And what he can do is give a Dark Angels unit within 9 inches the ability to heroically intervene up to 6 inches. Now, this one, the enemy could play around it, but that's actually pretty good, since it theoretically is a 15-inch threat range. So while it could be played around, it's also something that could really gum up the enemy's plans. This is one that may do very little, or it really could be game changing if you really know what you're doing with it, or if your opponent just doesn't know how to play around it correctly. Now he also has Imperium, of course, Adeptus Astartes. He has Dark Angels. He is a monster, and he is not in. He's a Primarch, of course. He counts as a Supreme Commander. He does have the Inner Circle keyword, and he has his own name, Lionel Johnson. Okay, and his model is pretty amazing. Everybody says he looks like Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones, which is only added to by the fact that he is the lion. And there's a big old lion on one of his shoulder guards, which looks pretty cool. And of course, if you're a Game of Thrones person, you'll know that the Lannisters' symbol is the lion. So this may not be a coincidence. The appearance is almost too much to be believed. I have a feeling the designers were kind of going for that, especially with the blonde mustache and goatee and the hair that they gave him. All his gear looks really great, and his two little Watchers in the Dark assistants are pretty awesome looking too. So overall, I think it's a great model. I will probably be getting one since I don't have a Dark Angels army and don't really plan to get one. I'm holding out for Vulcan to show up. But since Vulcan doesn't have rules, I'm not going to get the Forge World model anytime soon either, because I don't know what I would do with him. But I think the question that seems to be on the internet's mind right now is, does Lionel Johnson suck? Or is he good? Well, I'm not going to answer the question in terms of a competitive game because I don't play tournaments at this time, and probably won't be anytime in the near future. And this channel is really more about talking about casual games, or casual competitive games, as I like to call them, games that are played to competitive rules. I would say no. For casual play, he doesn't suck. He is, however, I would think a little bit overcosted at 320 points, given what he does. Now, his offensive power is not overcosted. While his ranged attack is somewhat less than we might like, it's not bad for what he does. He's not supposed to be a ranged fighter. I would really have liked to see this be more like 3 bolt shots and 2 plasma shots, but I don't. That's a quibble. I don't think that his ranged capability is much more than decoration. It's good to have it. He can maybe put down something that's on its last legs, but that's not what you're taking him for. His utility value in a casual game is pretty good. Now, in a casual game, of course, you're much more likely to find yourself against an opponent who does not know how to deal with a lot of this stuff. His fight first is gonna, if you know how those rules work in a casual game, a lot of times people will miscalculate and not fight him at the right time, especially if you can put fight last on something from another source that he's engaged with. That's gonna make him very, very effective when it's not a turn in which he's charged. The aura of reroll hits and runes of 1, that's better than it sounds. It's not technically full rerolls, but you're frequently going to be around stuff that's hitting on 3s and often on 2s. And same thing with wounding. You're going to be wounding on 3s and then 2s, maybe, depending on the army you're facing. But almost always on 3s up anyhow. So basically you're rolling everything that isn't a 2, or that just doesn't need to be rerolled. And the 2 extra denies are pretty good because Dark Angels don't seem to take a lot of librarians. They seem to be a lot of deny the witch. So this could be really good if you're playing like an Abhor the Witch type approach. Going down to his Warlord trait, if you use this cleverly, this is the kind of thing that in casual games he's going to be a real problem for a lot of people because they just won't know how to play around it. It's a movement ability where they can just suddenly get somewhere that they otherwise couldn't. And now this is one of those things that some people would probably say it's going to be a gotcha. If you're playing an opponent who's reasonably well versed in the game already, like basically knows the basic rules, they've probably already heard about him and they've probably already looked at his data sheet, and there's no reason they shouldn't have read about this trait. So while it may be sporting to remind them, I don't think this is a gotcha on the level of some obscure stratagem or anything like that. By the same token, it's going to require some real thought on your part to put it to use effectively. This is the kind of warlord trait that you're probably going to get good effects out of maybe once a battle. You're going to have one really good opportunity to just completely throw a spanner in the works with this thing, and you have to take it and it's going to work, or else it's either not going to work because you just roll badly, or miscalculate how effective it's going to be, or the opportunities just never come up, or you'll miss it. I think where a lot of the heartache over his abilities and his cost come from is his defenses. His defenses are not outstanding. Now, toughness 6 is decent. It's not quite as much as a vehicle, but given that he's a lot smaller than a vehicle and he can still hide and benefit from lookout certs, toughness 6 is going to force a lot of lesser weapons into a bad wound profile, a 5-up wound. That's gonna take things like flamers, even heavy flamers, uh, down to wounding on a 5. You don't see them these days very often. Drakari Disintegrators are strength 5. I believe Custodians have a lot of strength 5 attacks. And of course, even strength 6 attacks are going to go from wounding on 3s to wounding on 4s. So that's going to be good at a lot of the more dangerous anti-infantry weapons. Where this is, and then it's also obviously going to force the occasional strength 3 weapons into wounding on a 6. So that can be helpful too against armies that have a lot of those, or they're throwing frag grenades at him for some reason, which you never know. Somebody might do it. He only has 9 wounds. Now, this is both good and bad. Obviously, this allows him to benefit from Lookout Sir, but 9 wounds is just not a lot for a high-value target like him. And he doesn't reduce damage at all. He doesn't have -1 to damage. He doesn't takes half damage. He doesn't have phase cap. Now, if you look back at my video about what I want to see changed in 10th edition, you'll see that I don't like phase caps, and I don't like abilities that change one attack to 0. Because I find both of them too fiddly and complicated, and easy to forget or make mistakes. I prefer everything to either be -1 or be half damage. Now, or the change to 1 damage, but that one I don't think should be on special characters, and certainly not anything like a Primarch. This guy's, and his shield, you'll notice he's actually worse than a Storm Shield. It only gives him the 4-pin vuln. It does not give him the +1 to armor save. That's not great, because you have things out there like railguns and Magna rail cannons that ignore invulnerables, which is something else I think that needs to go. Now, the inflicting mortals on opponents who make melee attacks against him, that's very useful, but the problem here is shooting. And his main defense against shooting is going to be having a whole bunch of Blade Guard and or Terminators, preferably with storm, the kind with storm shields or something similar around him. He's not that tough to shooting, and his mobility is somewhat impeded by the fact that he needs to have these other guys around him, and where he's real vulnerable is to armies that will do things like you get into combat with kill a whole bunch of stuff, and then either he's out flapping in the breeze because he killed everything, or because now the enemy falls back and then he gets shot by something else that's nearby. So the problem here is that that's going to not only make him easier to shoot if he gets out away from his bodyguards because he may be charged successfully and they didn't with his reroll. It's also, it limits the utility of his mobility, because he could easily run out there ahead of the other Dark Angels infantry. Yes, I know he's not got an infantry keyword, but he's still a dude on foot with his longer movement, and kind of get himself into trouble. Now, you could consider maybe, and I'm not a Dark Angels player, like I said, so I'm not sure, but maybe he could be more effectively screened with some sort of bikes. Like you could have several units, one that kind of goes behind and one that goes ahead. You might even consider, if it's something like Blade Guard, maybe advancing them to keep him screened and letting him charge, because he's going to do, I would venture to guess, at least as much as a 4 to 5 member squad of Blade Guard in terms of damage. Possibly more damage even than than a 6-member full-strength unit squad. I haven't calculated out the numbers on that, but it could be. But I think that's his problem, and that is the other side of the coin for casual play too. If you're playing an opponent who is more skillful than you, or an opponent that just has a ton of shooting, but either way, if they can just clear out his bodyguards and then shoot him, this may be one of those things where now you've lost, say, 210 points, say, for 6 Blade Guard, plus 320 for him. That's 530 points out of a 2,000 point game. That's a quarter of your army lost. So I think that his defenses are really not correct. Like I said, I don't like to see the phase caps or the reduce one attack to 0. I don't think phase capping is the right answer. I could see him having a reduce 1 shooting attack per phase to 0 damage, or a -1 damage. Is what dreadnoughts have. I could even probably see this guy having halves all incoming damage at his points value. This guy, 320 points. This guy costs more than a land fortress does. He costs more than a repulsor executioner. He costs a ton. In fact, he almost costs as much as a full 10-member squad of assault terminators. That would be 330 points. This guy's only 10 points behind my 330 point 10-member assault terminator squad that I like in the Salamander. So he really should have a little bit better defenses. Yeah, his offensive power is amazing in melee, but that's really it. His utility is decent, but not amazing. His defenses are not terrible, but I don't think adequate. And his shooting is, given that he's not a shooting character, his shooting is not horrendous, but it's not great either. It's really all melee offense here with some utility, and he definitely, I think, needs a defensive buff. I don't think that this guy would be the end of the world to deal with. Now, granted, as a Salamanders player, I have access to lots of flame, so aggressors, which could make his charging very, very unpleasant for him. I don't think he's bringing enough to the table for his points. I don't think that the character the profile is bad. I don't think it's like looking at it and like, man, I would never take that guy. I'm not worried about him taking up the Lord of War slot. Let's compare him to Trajan Valoris. Trajan Valoris has movement 6, weapon skill 2, plus skills 2, strength 5, toughness 5, wounds 8, attack 6, leadership 11, save 2 up. He has a Misericordia, so he gets an extra attack from that. He's got the sweep with the... He's got the attack with the axe at strength 10. Comparable AP minus 3 damage 3. Shooting is rapid fire 1. Strength 5. AP minus 1 damage 2. Now he also has a 5-up shrug. Regenerates command points. He does the heroic intervention trick himself, rather than giving it to somebody else. He rerolls all of his hits, as opposed to rerolling hits and wounds on a 1. He causes nearby custodians to reroll hits and wounds of 1. So he's got the same aura that Johnson has. Refunds command points. He allows you to use... he allows you to change order of martial katas. He has a optional change damage to 0, fight again, or fight next. Overall, he's actually a little bit better than defensively. He has the same 4-up invul, and he has a wound shrug. He's a slightly lower toughness as a save. He has only 1 less wound. Plus, he has his ability to change 1 attack to 0. That could really be great. And he has a lot more general utility. Keep in mind that Trajan is 120 points cheaper than Lionel Johnson. So for the 120 point difference, I would say that no, Lionel Johnson is not worth that much of a difference. I would say at 320 he needs some kind of a command point refund, even if it's a once per battle. He refunds the first command point you spend or something like that. Uh, or maybe gives you a free command reroll once per battle. And I would probably give him a 5-up shrug, or else a damage reduction 1. One last thing. We're coming into 10th edition. I suspect that part of the reason this profile is the way it is that in 10th edition, lethality is going to be decreased, and you're going to have durability increases in certain ways baked into the game. So this profile is probably not going to be that far off from what you're going to see on his 10th edition datasheet, which is going to come out here very, very soon. You certainly can't imagine that it wouldn't if they're going to invalidate all the codexes and current rules. And this is their newest release, then they're going to want to put rules out for him. So if you're a Dark Angels player and you've got this guy, I wouldn't get too wrapped around the axle about how good he is right now. We just don't know how things are going to play out yet in 10th, but I do think survivability generally is going to be higher. So this defensive profile might not be as bad as it initially appears if it's going to be a fairly close conversion over the 10th edition version. So don't get demoralized if you're thinking, man, my cool new Primarch model is just going to be constantly getting laid out by bloodthirsters and railguns. I don't think that's what's going to happen, especially not after June rolls around. So, anyhow, thanks for listening today or watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, comment down below, and click the notifications bell for more great content from Wilderness Wargaming, and I hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye.